You are not going to have children. Not can't. Will not. It is a condition of the position your family is about to hand you. You are a woman in Sippar, on the Euphrates. In a few days you will be placed inside a walled compound. The scribes call the gagum, a word the older scholarship translated as the locked house. Inside it, you will own land. You will lend silver at interest. You will adopt an heir and sign contracts that outlast you by nearly 4,000 years. And there is a law from your century, one of the most quoted lines in the entire Hammurabi collection, that says, "A woman like you can be burned alive for walking into a tavern." Except it does not say that. Not about you. And almost every retelling you have ever heard gets that exact thing wrong. Let's get one thing straight. Nothing here was burned, buried, or lost. The archive for these women is loud. The problem is what 4,000 years of readers decided it meant. The word for what you are is Naditu. It is an Old Babylonian institution, roughly the 4 centuries, between about 1880 and 1550 BCE, with its high point under Hammurabi and the king who followed him. Those dates come from modern king lists, not from anyone in Sippar writing down a year. Treat them as a shelf, not a stopwatch. Susandra van Wyk Journal for Semitics, 2015 spent 36 pages on a single law about these women. And the first thing she has to do, before she can say anything else, is stop and explain that Naditu is not one job. It is a category term covering more than one group, in more than one city, with different rules. Hold on to that. It is going to matter more than anything else in this video. You come from a family with weight, land, name, connections. That is the profile of the women who ended up here. And that sentence has a second half that the tablets do not answer. Whether you wanted this, the contracts record what you owned and who you adopted. They do not record whether a girl walked into that compound or was walked into it, and the sources that survived are not going to tell you. What we can say is what the position required. Rivka Harris's demographic study of Sippar, 1975, treats the Naditu as a central economic population of the city, not a footnote to it. And the rule at the center of the position, the one every scholar in this video agrees on, no children of your own. So, what does a woman forbidden to have children actually do for 40 years? She buys, she sells, she rents, she lends silver and takes interest on it. She arranges adoptions, splits inheritances, moves dowries. Witold Tyborowski, writing in 2008, puts it as a package: property in her own name, loans under her own management, and family law agreements complicated enough that specialists still argue about how they worked. Look at the adoption line again, because it is the strangest one in the list. A woman forbidden to produce an heir spends her working life producing heirs on paper, adopting, drafting, deciding whose name the property lands on after her. The prohibition and the paperwork are not in tension. They are the same system. The children were closed off. The estate was not. And a dowry moves through her hands to hers or somebody else's, changing households, getting counted. That is a working woman with a seal, in the 19th century BCE. And none of it is inferred from a poem. It is bookkeeping. And that is the exact sentence I want to stop on, because that is the sentence that gets a channel in trouble. There is a statistic about these women moving around the internet right now. It is precise to 2 decimal places. It tells you what share of the sale contracts in Sippar had a woman's name on them, and what much smaller share of the loans did. I went to find it. It is credited to a real scholar, in a real chapter, in a real book. Katrien De Graef, 2016. De Gruyter. The chapter exists. I resolved its DOI live. What I could not do was open the chapter and put my finger on the sentence that number came out of. A number that clean, with a decimal that sharp, is the single easiest thing in the world to hand you, and the single easiest thing to have quietly smoothed on the way here. So, I am not going to say it. You will hear it somewhere else this week, stated flatly, with no name attached to it. When you do, notice that nobody told you which page. One more thing before the law, because you need to know what you are unlearning. For most of the 20th century, a reader who met this woman in a book met her in one of 2 costumes. Costume 1, the nun, sealed away, chaste, praying, economically invisible. Costume 2, the sacred prostitute, the temple woman whose body was part of the ritual, a category that got applied across the ancient Near East for decades, with very little to hold it up. Both of those readings have been pulled apart by the scholarship of the last few decades, and the criticism of them runs in one direction. They took a modern argument about sex and pressed it onto a body of evidence that is mostly about property. I am describing a shift in a field, not quoting anybody. I have not read the original nun and prostitute arguments in the primary literature, so you are getting the shape of the change here, not its sentences. If you want the sentences, the 4 scholars named in this video are where I would start. But notice what both costumes have in common. Both of them are answers to the question, what was she doing with her body? Nobody was asking what she was doing with her silver. And her silver is what the tablets are actually full of. Now the law. Because you have heard this one, even if you have never heard the word Naditu, Law 110 in the Hammurabi collection, a Naditu who opens a tavern or enters one to drink, that woman is to be burned. It is the most cinematic sentence in the entire archive of these women, and every retelling reaches for it, and I understand why. Fire is easier to film than a barley loan. Here is what Van Wyk establishes before she gets anywhere near what the law means. In her own words, Naditu is a genus term for 3 groups, including the uncloistered Naditu group of Marduk, living outside the secluded areas of Sippar and Babylon, and the cloistered Naditu of Shamash living in the Gagum of Sippar. 2 different groups, 2 different gods. One inside the walls, one outside them, in the open city, allowed to marry. And Van Wyk's conclusion, again, in her own words, is that Law 110 forbade the uncloistered Naditu, the one Naditu group not living in the Gagum, from entering the tavern-keeper's business. Read that again with your own life in it. You are the one inside the compound. You are the woman in the locked house, dedicated to Shamash. The burning law, the line that carries your name in every version of this story told for a general audience, is aimed, in the reading of the scholar who read it most closely, at the women who were not in the room with you. That is not a small correction. That is the difference between a woman living under threat of execution and a woman living under a business restriction that applied to her colleagues across town, and it is contested. That is the next chapter, and it is the reason this video exists. 3 scholars, 1 law, 1 punishment, 3 completely different answers about what it was protecting. Reading 1 is the old one, the one that ran for most of the 20th century. The law is about chastity. A Nadītu near wine and men is a Nadītu near sin, so the state threatens her with fire to keep her body in line. I am giving you that position secondhand, through Van Wyk's summary of the people who held it. I have not read those scholars in the original, and I am not going to put quotation marks around a position I have only met through someone else's footnote. Reading 2 is Martha Roth, 1999, in a volume of essays for Johannes Renger. Roth's argument, as Van Wyk quotes her directly, is that Law 110 is a regulation of economic competition, aimed at those uncloistered Naditu of Marduk, and what is being protected, in Roth's reading, is not a woman's virtue. It is a tavern-keeper's margin, what Van Wyk quotes as the marginal economic niche of the small-time moneylender, already being squeezed by bigger merchants. So, the most famous chastity law in the ancient world becomes, in that reading, a small business protection statute, with a fire attached. Reading 3 is Van Wyk herself, in 2015, and she does the thing that makes this whole episode worth your time. She disagrees with both of the readings above. In her own words, she disagrees that it is a reflection of the protection of the chastity of a Naditu, or an economic limitation in competing with the tavern-keeper. Her position is that the law covers economic relationships tied to the crown's tax collection. Not her body, not the tavern, the king's ledger. Chastity, competition, taxes, same 11 lines of cuneiform, same fire. Sit with how strange that is. 3 specialists, all reading the same short paragraph, in the same dead language, with the same dictionaries open. One of them thinks it is about a woman's virtue. One thinks it is about a bar owner's income. One thinks it is about the crown's revenue. This is not a case of missing evidence. Everyone has all of it. Here is where a normal history channel picks one. It picks the tax reading because it is the newest and it sounds clever. Or, it picks the chastity reading because it is the one the audience already believes and it makes a better thumbnail. Then it says, historians now think, and moves on, and you leave with a clean fact you can repeat at dinner. I am not going to pick one for you. That disagreement is real. It is in print. It is between named people with page numbers, and a channel that flattens it into one sentence to sound authoritative is a channel that is lying to you about how much anybody actually knows. And it gets better, because there is a 4th voice, and she is not even arguing about the tavern. Katrien De Graef, 2023, in the journal Avar. Her subject is not the law. Her subject is the childlessness itself, the condition you were handed in the first 60 seconds of this video. For a century, the 2 standard explanations for why these women could not bear children were a taboo on sex or a taboo on blood. De Graef's own words, She believes these traditional explanations to be faulty and inadequate. Her alternative is not another rule. It is that the childlessness was doing identity work, that being other than mother was, in her words, an important part of their social identity, not a deprivation attached to the job. She points at the word itself, Naditu, in her reading, the fallow woman. Not barren, fallow, a field deliberately left unplanted. So now count the readings on the table: chastity, competition, taxes, and a fourth scholar saying the question everyone else is fighting over is the wrong question. 4,000 years of tablets, fully legible, and this is where we are. That is not a failure of the archive. That is what an honest archive looks like from the inside. Before you leave here calling her a banker, and you will see that framing. It is all over the internet. The first female investment bank, the original girl boss of Mesopotamia. 3 things. 1. De Graef's own caution cuts both ways. If childlessness was not experienced as a loss inside their own social structure, then it is also not a feminist career choice made in ours. Reading a modern liberation story onto her is the same move as reading a modern chastity panic onto her. Both put our vocabulary in her mouth. This is not a girl boss story. It is a legal category, entered young, on terms set by other people. 2. Look at what the arrangement costs someone else. The Naditu of Marduk, the group outside the walls, the ones allowed to marry, could still not bear children. So, in Van Wyk's summary of Roth and Harris, such a woman may provide her husband with a second wife, and the children that second woman bore counted as the Naditu's children. There is an Akkadian word for that second woman. I am not going to say it, because I found 2 different words for her in 2 different places, and the sources that would settle which one is right are sitting behind a page range I have not read with my own eyes. A term for a human being is not something you guess at out loud to keep a sentence moving. What I can tell you without guessing: a second woman's body did the part of the contract the Naditu was forbidden to do, the children were legally credited elsewhere, and the record hands us the arrangement without handing us her. 3. And this is the one I want you to take with you. There are Naditu with names, real ones, in real tablets, reconstructed in a 1962 article by Rivka Harris in the Journal of Cuneiform Studies. Women who ran temple property for decades. A woman who worked as a scribe across the reigns of several kings. I am not saying any of those names tonight, because in 2014 an Assyriologist wrote a historical novel about a Naditu in Sippar. It is a good novel by a serious scholar. It also uses names taken from that same body of research, and the summaries, the blog posts, and the search results have been quietly mixing the two ever since. So when a page tells you a specific woman managed the temple's property for 50 years, that detail might come from a tablet, or it might come from chapter 9. I could not tell them apart without the 1962 article in front of me, and I do not have it in front of me. A name is the last thing these women have left. I am not going to be one more person who hands you a fictional one and calls it recovered history. So the Naditu of Sippar, property owners, lenders, adopters, signatories on contracts that are still sitting in museum drawers, still legible, still hers. No fire took this archive. No conquering army burned these tablets. They are, if anything, some of the best preserved paperwork any woman anywhere has ever left behind. And the institution itself did end. Not in a massacre, it is described as peculiar to the Old Babylonian period, and after that period, it is simply not there anymore. A woman could be born into a category, spend 50 years signing contracts inside it, and have the category outlive her by only a few generations before it stopped existing at all. Nobody had to abolish her. The shelf she was filed on was taken out of the room. What happened instead is quieter, and it is still happening. Every generation that read those contracts arrived carrying a category nun, banker, prostitute, feminist, victim, and filed her under it, and then handed her a law that belonged to a woman across town, because that law had a fire in it and hers had a barley receipt. They have always been here, signed, sealed, and filed under somebody else's word. Her seal survived 4,000 years. Her category did not survive us. Thank you to our family watching from Philadelphia. Welcome to Petty Past, the history class you were owed.